Conservation of organic materials in the tropics is notoriously challenging, particularly with high humidity and temperatures that often invites insects and triggers the onset of mildew. Therefore, as expected, no textiles have been found in archaeological sites in Indonesia, except for very early asbestos cloths, which of course are inorganic in nature. Surprisingly, however, some textiles of relatively early dates do survive, some as early as 13th century that have been preserved in some islands in the archipelago. On the slide is an example of cotton textiles that were manufactured in Gujarat, India, traded to and preserved in Toraja in Sulawesi Island. The date has been established to be 13th to 14th century based on carbon-14 dating technique. The same type of Gujarati textiles have also been found in Egypt as shown in the example here, which also bears a similar date to the Torajan one. The most astonishing aspect of the Toraja textiles is not only its early dating, but its excellent state of preservation. And you can see here the comparison between those that were found in Toraja and the fragment that's found in Egypt. So how do these textiles survive? In Toraja, traded textiles, including Indian origin, were regarded as heirloom and sacred cloths called mawa. They would be displayed in rituals. For example, here is a funeral ceremony where an 18th century Indian cloth is used as decorative banner. When mawa are not used for display, they would be kept in baskets, often said to be hung above the hearse. So despite the fact they were not kept in what conservators in the West regarded as ideal storage conditions, these early textiles have survived for centuries in the traditional ways. Here is another example of a village in Sumba Island where heirloom objects were kept in baskets and hung from the roof, which is considered to be the abode of the ancestors. Today, there are still many precious cultural objects that are kept within individual local communities, as they are still being used in rituals. In order to preserve this important heritage, the Indonesian government has now started to create a national list of heritage objects and to work with various communities on how to best preserve their collection. This is the starting point of our interest in writing this paper. Conservation as a discipline is a new field in Indonesia. Saiful Bakhri is one of the 5 Indonesian people working in the country today with a graduate degree in conservation. He will present next on the many challenges of conservation on the fields, especially when dealing with local communities. After Saiful's talk, Kristal Hale will discuss a few indigenous approaches of textile care and the custodial care practice adopted by the Museum Textile in Jakarta. She will also highlight some opportunities that integrate local wisdoms within the museum environment. Our work is also inspired by previous studies on traditional textile preservation knowledge in Southeast Asia, in particular the works of Julia Brennan and Nuchada Panprasankut, together with the Regional Center for Archaeology and Fine Arts of the Southeast Asian Ministers of Education Organization and the Queen Sirikit Museum of Textiles.
Thank you, Bu Sandra, for the introduction. As Bu Sandra said, I'm one of the conservation graduates from overseas. I was graduated at the end of 2018 from the University of Melbourne Conservation Program. Shortly after study, I joined the government. My office is called Balai Pelestarian Cagar Budaya Bali, or translated as Bali Cultural Heritage Preservation Office. It's a technical field unit of the Ministry of Education, Culture, Research and Technology of the Republic of Indonesia. And as you can see on the screen, my office is handling the care and preservation of cultural heritage in 3 provinces, Bali, West, and East Nusa Tenggara. During my early times here, I learned a lot of ethical considerations when working on living heritage. For example, when I worked for a condition survey of this temple in 2019, this is Pura Mauspait, an ancient temple from the 13th century located in Denpasar. My colleagues prayed in front of the temple before commencing the work, and because the local priest wasn't available at that time, my colleague, the one with the white headband and black jacket, is a local priest in his neighborhood, so he was the one who blessed us. Another completely different thing, we wear traditional Balinese clothes every time we work at a Balinese temple. It's a combination of saput, outer sarong, the white sarong that my colleague at the left used, and kamen, or inner sarong, the pink one, and usually along with udang, or headband for men. We don't really use PPE here unless it's very necessary. And if you look at the terracotta figure on the far left, next to the door, or I put in more detail on the right, it's used similar clothes as well. And sometimes we have to remove it for condition reporting and then put it back after the work has been done. Further, there are some objects that are only accessible during significant religious days. I found out about this recently. My colleagues and I worked on another condition survey at Pura Puseh Balai Agung Perean Baturiti in Tabanan. We started the day with a discussion with the village leaders and elders to state our intention to record some cultural heritage located in this temple, and the village welcomed us. In the picture on the left, we were blessed by the local priest before the work. And this is the main part of the temple, very high up. We had to climb a very steep and narrow stair and enter through a very small door. And inside, there is an inscription and a broken Ganesha statue. Again, we had to remove the cloth used by the statue when recording and put them back when we were done. And this one is in Tutubada traditional village in Nagekeo, East Nusa Tenggara. My very first field work nearly 2 years ago. When we discussed and conveyed our intention, a disclination came from the elders as they perceived us as outsiders, and they were hesitant to let us touch their objects. After explaining who we are and what we do and convincing them that we are using traditional locally available material that wouldn't harm the objects, and the community finally welcomed us. They held a ceremony the next day, sacrificing a piglet and a chicken. Then we had a feast before the work. Another interesting point is they read the pig's heart as a way to know whether the work is allowed by their ancestor or no. And the elder said, yeah, the work can continue. Nothing is prohibited. Just remember to go home earlier since we were 6 hours away from the nearest airport. From all of these, I learned that conservation work needs a place-based approach. So different cultures need a different approach.
Saiful, thank you for these insights into your compelling work with communities to preserve heritage sites in Bali as well as East and West Nusa Tenggara. And thank you, Sandra, for your introduction. As Sandra and Saiful mentioned, custodial care and traditional practice are integral in communities throughout the Indonesian archipelago, allowing the preservation of tangible and non-tangible heritage. Traditional house structures vary throughout Indonesia, but tend to have the commonality of being elevated off the forest or jungle floor. On the island of Sulawesi, traditional houses appear to float above the ground, as seen in the left image, as they are supported by wooden beams, taking the form of pillars. This allows air circulation throughout the dwellings and aids in deterring rodents, which are an inherent danger to textile collections. This air circulation also serves to mitigate mildewing of organic materials. As a further preventative measure, precious textiles are traditionally stored with aromatic spices to deter insects. As Sandra previously discussed, textiles found in Sulawesi, which date to the 14th to 15th century, were traded along the spice route from Gujarat, India, to Indonesia, where they were preserved in excellent condition for hundreds of years, thanks to custodial preservation techniques. The traditional practice is to bring out old textiles on rare occasions, and such textiles are not usually displayed for long periods out of the home or adat house, thus limiting the total light exposure which might otherwise fade them. The process of unwrapping and rewrapping bundles of heirloom textiles allows custodians to monitor them for pests and damage, even though this is not the primary purpose of these activities. As an aside, Indonesia's vibrant textile tradition continues to flourish as local weavers produce cloths on backstrap looms, as seen in the right-hand image. Damaged textiles were repaired locally with types of darning, crochet, and needle stitching techniques that were often matched to the tonalities of the object, such as the repairs on this garment from Sulawesi, which dates to the 19th or 20th century, as well as this trade textile found in Indonesia, yet imported along spice routes from India. A textile imbued with ancestral blessing, and only on display on ceremonial occasions, would not have been handled in the same manner as a sarong intended for regular wear, which is why ceremonial textiles do not appear to have been aqueously cleaned. However, there is a long tradition of cleaning Indonesian sarongs and other textiles with lawak, also known as soap nut, a native saponin-containing nut whose flesh is used for cleaning sarongs. The use of saponin-containing plants and their applications, both currently and historically, has been studied extensively by various institutions, researchers, and conservators, as mentioned by Sandra. In Lembata, daily use sarongs are also sometimes cleaned by rinsing them in the sea, since it is believed that salt water does not cause synthetic dyes to run as much as fresh water. These approaches, however, are not usually employed for ceremonial textiles, which are generally left undisturbed. An integrative type of conservation practice takes place at the Museum Textile, located in Jakarta, the capital of Indonesia. Constructed in the early 19th century, the museum collection began with the initial bequest of 500 textiles, but expanded through donations to include close to 3,000 pieces. In order to maintain, conserve, and exhibit their collections, the Museum Textile utilizes a hybrid approach for conservation, combining traditional custodial techniques with current museum practices, while working closely with nonprofit organizations, advisors, and volunteers. The Society of Textile Lovers, Himpunan Wastra Prema, was formed for the preservation and study of textiles concurrent to the museum's founding. This group has been deeply involved in various projects, including exhibitions and new acquisitions. In addition, the Indonesian Heritage Society, a nonprofit organization, provides assistance, including conservation-related support, to many cultural institutions in Jakarta, including the Museum Textile. Textile conservator Benny Grotha was recruited by a former curator and works part-time at the museum as a conservator and advisor. Currently one of the most experienced individuals in textile conservation in Indonesia, he commented that the biggest problem is the difficulty of building expertise, because the government system rotates individuals from one job position to the next every 4 to 5 years. These postings are frequently dichotomous. In one position, a conservator might be working on architectural structures, and in the next, textiles. In order to focus on textile preservation, Benny Grotha has chosen to remain in private practice, which allows him to advise the Museum Textile, supervise work of university interns, and provide basic textile conservation training to museum staff from provincial museums. At the Museum Textile, textiles are documented, conserved, and stored, as seen in these images. When objects such as sarongs require aqueous cleaning, Benny Grotha and the staff of the Textile Museum use soap nuts soaked in water to produce a frothy, saponin-containing wetting and cleaning agent. This traditional custodial approach allows textiles to be cleaned in a way that is gentle on the objects, as well as being environmentally friendly. Since the soapnut tree grows in the courtyard of the museum, there is a continual, fresh, and organic supply of conservation materials. By utilizing traditional custodial techniques and current conservation practice, the Museum Textile preserves both tangible and non-tangible heritage with an approach that is practical and innovative. This approach complements centuries-old custodial knowledge, which has and continues to allow precious objects to be preserved in local communities to this day. In order to build a national community of conservators, Saiful Bakhri and his colleagues with graduate degrees in conservation founded Institute Konservasi, an organization designed to provide a platform to exchange knowledge, discuss, and advocate for conservation ethics and standards in Indonesia. In the spring of 2021, Saiful and the Institute Konservasi organized the Bali Art and Heritage Conservation Internship, providing 5 interns, including undergraduate students, museum volunteers, and civil servants, the opportunity to engage with a variety of conservation professionals and scientific researchers, expanding their knowledge of the field. As we heard from Sandra, founder of Tracing Patterns Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to the community of international textile scholars and makers, building a body of research about traditional and contemporary textiles across the world, the preservation of heritage textiles is a long-standing and ongoing tradition in Indonesia, as attested to by the excellent and astounding condition of 500-year-old textiles. As textiles have transitioned from being part of village life to museum objects, there is an increasing need to formalize an interconnected network of conservation professionals and offer training and support to museum staff so that they can continue to integrate traditional custodial techniques with current museum practices. In Indonesia, conservation is a communal effort, one that involves conservators, museum personnel, volunteers, and sometimes an entire village.